Thank you guys for coming tonight. I'm glad we could get back in track. I'm sorry I missed the last Cedar Talks, but I'm really excited about our speaker tonight. This is Brian Steffen from Simpson College. He was my advisor when I was a journalism student, and I'm thrilled to have him here. You'll notice that I forgot to bring the index cards and the pens, so you can't take notes with whatever I provided while Brian is here, but feel free to take notes on your phone or message me on Facebook, whatever you need to do. Justin will have the recording of tonight's event on Pan, and I'll put that on our Facebook page, Cedar Talks Charles City on Facebook. Brian Steffen, thank you.
Thank you. And I get applause. Ooh, that's loud. Okay, I get applause. I wish my students would applause me. They're usually like, here we go. Kate asked me to come, I don't know, 3 months ago. And she said, would you talk about free speech? And we are having it in a pub. And they're like my two favorite things, freedom of speech and pubs. So, and actually Kate, this is serious. I love Kate. She's, we've known each other now for what, about 8 years, I think, since she came as a freshman. And she was a part of a group of students in 2013 that we spent a semester together in London. And we might have seen a pub or two there. So anyway, even before she asked me to come, I was noticing her work that she was doing on community engagement with this program, which I said, you know, this is exactly what we're doing in journalism these days. The days of you just publish a newspaper and you count on people to read it because you put it up, you know, you send it out to subscribers or sell it in the store or whatever the case may be. Those days are over because you've got 10,000 things screaming at you, right? So things like this are very cool. And I just told her, in fact, that she's going to pay this back to me in the spring. I'm going to have her come down and talk to my kids about engagement, and which is always kind of cool when the professor asks you to come back and talk, isn't it? Right? Because you remember when you were like a freshman or sophomore, and I had some now old person come and say that no, he really knows what he's talking about. So anyway, I am looking for my presenter. I'm a PowerPointer, but not a death by PowerPointer. So you can pretty much know everything you need to know just by watching this tonight. As Kate will tell you, I'm a very interactive person. I don't really go off a prepared text, but I have a few things I want to say and then open it up for conversation. And when we got talking about this back 2 or 3 months ago, it was right about the time of Charlottesville, and she thought this would be really a good time to talk about freedom of speech. And she says, do you know anyone who would come and talk? And I said, well, if you talk really nice to me, I might come and talk. So here I am tonight. And since then, we've had one other thing, you know, right, freedom of speech thing happen. And I'm going to talk about really 3 freedom of speech issues that are going on right now, which are neo-Nazis versus Antifa in Charlottesville. I'm going to talk about colleges and universities that apparently don't like to have conservatives around, which I think is a lot less of a problem than some media claim, but we'll talk about that. And then, of course, the past, I guess, week or so, taking a knee. It'd be really weird to have a freedom of speech session and not talk about what's happened over the past week. So, and I'm going to present to you, I guess, my kind of theory of not only just why freedom of speech is a great thing, because I don't think that anyone disagrees with that, but why we should really love the speech that we hate. Okay, so we're going to talk about that tonight. So first of all, a little bit about me. I've been at Simpson since the Millard Fillmore administration, and Kate wasn't even born in 1989. So anyway, but I've been there. Well, we'll just say forever. Before I went into teaching, I was a professional journalist for a few years. I actually started in community journalism. And I, as well, then went to the Ames Daily Tribune, and then I spent some time at the Associated Press before, as I said, I decided that teaching was a lot better than working for a living. So, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, because I would bet there might be some teachers in here. So I spent a lot of time teaching, writing, and speaking on free speech issues. And my Facebook page is full of quite a bit of this, as is my Twitter feed. And so what I thought we would talk about is, first of all, if you take my First Amendment class, I tell you on the very first day that if you can recite from memory the words of the First Amendment, you don't have to take the course and you get an A right away. And in 28 years of doing it, no one has done it yet, right? So, which I think is always a pretty safe bet to make. So, but what is amazing about this is every year the Freedom Forum in Washington, D.C. does a State of the First Amendment survey, and they find something pretty shocking. In a good year, maybe 3 or 4% of Americans can name all 5 freedoms covered in the First Amendment. And amazingly, less than half can name even one. They know that there's a First Amendment. They probably know there's something called freedom of speech. They don't often put the two of them together. And so a big part of what I do is just simply say, you know what, you should know the basics here. So what I do is a slide like this, where I just try to break down the 45 words of the First Amendment and tell you what it says. And in fact, we're going to find out that what it says is a lot more complicated than what it appears to say. So anyway, it starts by saying Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. We're good there. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, right? 5 freedoms: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And even after we go over this, by the way, when I quiz my students, they still have a tough time remembering them all. So, but as citizens, I think at the very basic, if you don't trust the media, if you don't think that Colin Kaepernick or anyone else should take a knee, at the very least, I think that you should know what the 5 freedoms are. Now, that's, by the way, I would say, as somebody who also teaches writing at Simpson, that's, for 2017 standards, a really tortuously written sentence. Is there anyone here who is a teacher? Okay, well good, I get to talk about teachers then. Seriously, if a student wrote a sentence like this today in one of my classes, I might take them out back and want to shoot them. Because it's very poorly constructed. Actually, it's not poorly constructed, but it's virtually ununderstandable in a world of Twitter, Facebook, 25-word leads, etc. So the fact is that it seems pretty clear there's a right to freedom of speech, and Congress shall make no law abridging it. And, of course, if it was that easy, right, we really wouldn't have a heck of a lot to talk about tonight, right? Because any attempt to crack down on speech by Congress would be illegal. Now, we know, in fact, that there's many times that Congress has, in fact, cracked down on speech. And so what I try to do is I try to say, this is what it means, okay? It means, first of all, that we are free from government action to silence us on the basis of what it is we have to say. I can say anything I want in terms of having a point of view, and the government can't punish me for it. I can advocate free love, some 1960s stuff. okay? I could advocate that we, in fact, lob a nuclear missile into North Korea. I can advocate that Donald Trump should be impeached, or that Donald Trump should be reelected, whatever the case may be. The government can't do anything to stop us from saying things on the basis of what we say. Now, they can, if I decide I'm going to take this speech out in the middle of the street here and block the traffic, one of your local police officers would probably write me a ticket. And of course, I would then go over here to your courthouse and say, well, that's clearly a violation of my right to free speech. And that is what we call a time, place, and manner restriction. That government can tell me what the appropriate time, place, and manner to express myself is. And one place that it's probably never good to express yourself is in the middle of the street, if for no other reason than I'm going to get myself killed. And I might cause a tie-up in traffic, etc., okay? So, but the clear thing is, the government can't stop me from speaking out on anything, although government can tell me, you can't do it there, I don't care what you're saying, you're not going to do it in the middle of the street. I can't drive around this fair community at 3 in the morning with a bullhorn on top of my car, waking you all up. That's a time, place, and manner restriction. And as long as they're reasonable and rational, courts will say, well, that's fine. Okay? So we're going to talk about that here in a second with regard to our friends in Charlottesville. Okay. Now, there are certain exceptions to the First Amendment that the law over the centuries has worked out. The First Amendment doesn't protect fighting words. If I, hang around after the event tonight and have a couple or 3 whiskeys, and someone else has a couple or 3 whiskeys, and we start to get a little juiced up and we start to annoy each other, and he's shouting at me and I'm shouting at him, and it looks like we're about ready to knock down, that is not freedom of speech. That's using speech as a weapon. All right, so that's one limitation. Libel, falsely damaging the reputation of another individual, is libel, and that's not protected by the First Amendment. Obscenity is not protected by the First Amendment. Invasions of privacy aren't. There are others. We could get into a discussion just to say that, for example, with advertising, the courts say, well, it does get First Amendment protection, but not the same as I get by speaking here tonight. Let's just say, I could sit up here and tell you all kinds of lies tonight, and the First Amendment protects me. But if I buy advertising time in the newspaper and lie about this great sale that I'm having this weekend, but I'm not really having a sale, I'm just doing a bait and switch to get you into my store, I can't do that. Okay? So, anyway, the central meaning of the First Amendment is that it protects our right to engage in what we call political speech. And political speech can be read really broadly. It's not just speech about politics or government. It could be speech about culture, about education, about the arts. One of the great American philosophers on freedom of speech, Alexander Michaeljohn, basically said political speech is anything really that helps us live together in a civic community. And so it's not just writing a letter to the editor of the newspaper or writing a letter to your congressperson. It's all manner of things. All right? But here's the problem. A lot of that speech has a lot of baggage. A lot of that speech is, as we say, hateful, harmful, hurtful, offensive, false, and sometimes just downright propaganda. And that's kind of a real pain, right? That's the bad side of this. So I asked the question, how should we respond to this? How should we respond to a world in which we apparently have given Nazis, Klansmen, communists, all manner of people, the right to freely speak our views, their views. And they clash with our views, and we don't want to hear them. We find them disrespectful, we find them terrible, we can't believe that anyone would give that person a platform at all. And so how should we respond? Well, let's go back. Let's go back to kind of in our current day, the original kind of offensive, disrespectful speech case, and that was flag burning. Since 1989, when the Supreme Court decided that flag burning was a form of protected speech under our First Amendment, there have been many attempts, almost every year, by someone in Congress to introduce an amendment to the Constitution to amend the First Amendment so that it says, in essence, you have First Amendment rights except for when it comes to flag burning. Because when you burn flags, you've gone too far. Now, a lot of people find that offensive. The state of Texas, which tried to put somebody in jail, found it very offensive. I would imagine today, if you did a poll of American people on flag burners and flag burning, probably close to 85% of people would say, no, that's too far. The First Amendment should not protect them, should not protect that. And when they say that, I say what you really should do is you should go back and read the decision of the court, which is written by the now deceased Justice William Brennan, who is actually buried only about 30 feet away from John Kennedy. People go to the Kennedy grave, and I've gone to the Kennedy grave, but I don't know that anyone goes to see Bill Brennan's grave, pardon me. And but here's what Brennan said in 1989. He said, you know, I understand that you were offended by this, but other than being offended by it, we can't really see any damage that flag burning does. And so he says, you know what your response should be? It should be this. We can imagine no more appropriate response to burning a flag than in waving one's own. We can imagine no better way to counter a flag burner's message than by saluting the flag as it burns. In other words, and this is the key part, the answer to speech you disagree with or that you find offensive is not to shut up the speaker, but to answer the speaker. You don't like somebody walking on a flag, burning it, wearing a flag patch on the seat of their jeans, right? All manner of things. That's fine. But the answer isn't telling them they can't do that. The answer is, I think you're wrong to do that, and here's why I think you're wrong. The answer is, you know what? You don't like what people do with the flag? Go fly your flag from your house, from your truck, whatever you would like. The answer is, if you see someone burning a flag, instead of trying to take that flag away from them, or assault them, as people sometimes do, just stand there and politely salute the flag. That's how you tell them they're wrong. Okay? And I think that really is, in my view, two of the best sentences ever written about the meaning of freedom of speech. Now, that's not to say that the people who thought that Justice Brennan and the Supreme Court were wrong bought that reasoning. There's still a lot of people who say, nope, you can't allow that. The problem is, if you allow it, if you say, okay, except for flag burning, you have freedom of speech, what's the problem with that? What's next? Except for hip-hop music and flag burning, right? Except for taking a knee, except for Nazis, there's freedom of speech. And we went, from 1791 until 1989 with no one seriously saying that the First Amendment needed to be rewritten. And did we really want to go and play that card over this? Because if nothing else, how many people in this room have burned flags? How many people in Charles City have burned flags? How many times do you think I have burned a flag? None. I don't see flag burners. I just don't. Right? It's offensive to a lot of people. But that doesn't mean that most people are going to do it. It's extreme, sure. But I don't think most people are going to do it. Okay, so if answering speech is the good free speech answer and shutting people up is the bad free speech answer, we reach a point now where we've had 3 controversies in recent weeks. And the first one, of course, are the Nazis, neo-Nazis, and Antifa in Charlottesville, which, led to a good deal of argument and pitched debate. If you decided to take like a week off from social media, that was probably a good thing for you to do then. And what frequently happens, by the way, are people who think that the Nazis should have a right to march and the people who don't think they should, they'll argue back and forth, but they argue past each other. They don't ever actually address what the other people are doing. My argument is A, and the other person's answer is D. But what about A? I don't want to talk about A. I want to talk about D. Okay? So, here's what we know. We just said a moment ago the First Amendment protects speech of a political nature, and although we despise what neo-Nazis have to say, unless there are any neo-Nazis in the room, you have a First Amendment right to say that. But the First Amendment does not protect action. Which seems pretty clear, right? I have a First Amendment right to say that I think your state senator is a bum. I don't have a right to go to your state senator, who I don't know who he or she is, and punch them. I could make a rather twisted argument that my punch was actually an argument, but it's not, okay? So the question is what are these guys doing? Is it talking or is it acting? And the fact is, in our law, that's not a solid distinction. In fact, we know from our Constitution that anyone has a right to peaceably assemble. And you may say, well, they didn't peaceably assemble. They were shouting, they were burning tiki torches, and the only group that won out of all this was the local Pier 1 outlet that probably sold out all their tiki torches, right? And they were really menacing and nasty. I can see they can write a letter to the editor or write an op-ed for the newspaper and argue whatever they want, but when they're in my face, they've gone too far. But that's not what our system is founded on. Our system is not founded on you have the right to speak as long as no one reads you, right? In fact, you have a clear right to really push the edge of the envelope to make your points of view known. And sometimes that means that people get in your face. Now, not literally in your face. If I started deciding I was going to scream at you and like tower over you and scream, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But, if a bunch of neo-Nazis wanted to come here to Charles City and they were otherwise acceptable for a permit, the city would have to grant the permit. And you would much like seeing neo-Nazis run through this town. Pardon me? Yep. Let me give you the microphone so it gets on the tape.
I would argue if it was a question only of opinion, that they want to express their freedom of speech and whatever, they can go to some place which is more susceptible to their place in Alabama, for example, might be more accepting of what they're preaching. But the fact that they went to Charlottesville, university town, more liberal people, more diverse, that means they wanted to instigate friction.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. So, and actually the law is clear on that point too, because about 40 years ago, not neo-Nazis, but real Nazis, decided that they were going to have a pro-Nazi march in, of all places, Skokie, Illinois. Does anyone know what the religious or ethnic makeup of Skokie, Illinois is? Yes. It was a primarily Jewish community with hundreds of survivors of the Holocaust living there. And the argument was, you're not coming here to make an argument, you're coming here to instigate trouble. You're coming here to provoke us. And the Nazis said, yes, we are. But we're still protected by the First Amendment. And the United States Court of Appeals agreed with them. The case did not go to the Supreme Court. The ACLU, an organization founded largely by Jewish Americans, defended the Nazi Party in the Skokie case. By the way, lost a ton of members and donations over it. But they said, you know, if we're going to believe in freedom of speech, we're going to believe in it for everyone, even the people who would want to kill us with it. So,
what about the fighting words? What about the part about fighting words? How does that?
So, fighting words, very good, you know, are what they're engaging in fighting words. And the answer is, as our law interprets it, no. They're engaging in what our law calls hate speech. And, okay, so a fighting word is if I start getting in your face specifically, and saying, I think you're stupid, yada, 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 yada. By the way, I would never do that, but yada, yada, yada. And then you're so angry, you start calling me names. Okay? I don't know. Kate, did you take this class from me? Oh. Cedar doesn't do it as well as I do. I actually, here's what I do to demonstrate the difference. I actually find a rather large, beefy football player type of guy. Okay? And I ask him to come talk to me in my office, and he does. And I say, I want you to play act something with me. And he says, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm going to be handing back some quizzes, and I want you to be really upset with your score. And I want you to start kind of acting out about it. And I mean, obviously so, as I'm trying to lecture. And then all of a sudden I'm going to say, James, in my most memorable one ever, James, what's wrong? And he would start digging into me, okay? And instead of just saying, be quiet, I said, oh yeah? Well, you know what? If you got off your butt and actually studied some, you might do better on the quizzes. And he says, well, you know what? I don't know what else to do, and I think you're a rotten teacher. And I said, oh yeah? You think I'm a rotten teacher? You really think I'm a rotten teacher? He says, yeah, I think you're a rotten teacher. I said, well, then why don't we take it outside right now? And, right, me, against big muscular football player, but of course I'm throwing down. And he says, oh, I will take you out, old man. I will take you out, old man. And I say, you really think you're going to take me out? And I'm like right in his face. And in this particular instance, we were so good at it that the young woman sitting in the seat next to James started crying because she was sure there was going to be violence. Okay? And at that point when I saw her crying, I said, okay, James, we need to stop. Okay? But I said, you know, those are fighting words. We're not engaging in any kind of political argument there. We're engaging in some old-fashioned mansplaining, old ram, young ram, that's going to result in violence. That's what fighting words are. It's not, fighting words are not what you find offensive or dangerous or threatening necessarily. It's what might actually provoke an actual fight on the spot. Okay? Now, are you starting to say, well, that's a pretty thin line? Right, and there were fights. Right, there were fights, right? And in fact, somebody ran somebody down and killed her, right? But those did not happen because of the words. Has anyone watched the Vice mini-doc on Charlottesville? I don't know, you might, if there's a Facebook page for this, you might post that there. Because it really, I mean, it's just this amazing 22-minute piece of journalism. Vice HBO, yes. And it's gotten probably 5 million views now on YouTube. And you follow one of the neo-Nazis. who's really a contemptible human being in every way. And in fact, after this documentary ran, he got kicked off of OkCupid because apparently he was using OkCupid to get dates, but failing to tell the dates that he carries 6 guns at a time and has views out of 1930s Germany. Okay, so yes, I mean, our courts have labored since 1942 to establish the fact that while fighting words are not protected, hate speech, suggesting that one race of people is inferior to another, are not fighting words. The Ku Klux Klan's right to burn a cross is protected speech. And now, what you're saying is, it's not that easy, and Kate may remember, in Europe, where they have a little more direct experience with what happens when one maniacal group gets political power, hate speech is illegal. And the American constitutional system, in that regard, is a much more radical system in terms of the rights it grants the individual than Europe. In Canada, in any other Western democracy, this march would never have been allowed. That would be because of the history, yes. But in America, it is allowed. And by the way, you'll see if you watch this Vice video that the people are flashing their papers, their permit we have a right to do this, they can't shut us down. Now, by the way, eventually the Charlottesville police did shut it down, but not because of the content of the speech, because of the real fear of violence outbreaking, okay? So in that sense, it doesn't reach the question of the content of the speech, okay? Now, the Nazis, neo-Nazis, what's the difference between a Nazi and a neo-Nazi? I haven't figured that out. So, a Nazi is a Nazi. It's clear that the city of Charlottesville, just like the city of Charles City, cannot deny someone a permit on the basis of the message they wish to convey. If I want to have a 4th of July parade for the Chamber of Commerce, no one would object to that. I get a permit. But if I want my Nazi group to come to town, they still have to give it to me. If I say, look, you know what, I've lived up to all your requirements, I have insurance, we have taken steps to make sure that there's no outbreak of violence, we just want to walk peacefully through the street and say blood and soil, blood and soil. Okay? A really horrific message if you know the roots of that. But the city of Charles City would have to let me do that. The other side, Antifa, right? The anti-fascists. They got to speak too. And they did. Now, right? It broke into fighting, and the regulation there is of the fighting, not of the message. The Antifa, they were, the purpose of the protest was to protest the city of Charlottesville's or the state of Virginia's or the University of Virginia, one public body of some kind wanting to take down a statue of Robert E. Lee, which is a political message. We don't think you should take this down. Right. And that's protected speech. Right. Well, absolutely. Well, but to be clear, I can do that under our First Amendment. I can talk about Jews, women, blacks, Hispanics. The First Amendment protects me in saying that. Now, when I get out a gun, or somebody comes at me with a stick, and I start fighting with them, we're not in First Amendment land anymore, right? So, yes.
Wouldn't that also lead to imminent lawless action, or could be argued that it could lead to imminent lawless action, and per Bradenburg versus Ohio, that would lead to could and possibly and did in some cases lead to hate crimes. Couldn't that itself be argued in the case of Charlottesville that it would lead to imminent lawless action?
Good question. Somebody's taken a First Amendment class. Where did you go to? Iowa State. No, I love Iowa. I'm an Iowa State grad. Okay. So here's the point. He's referring to a case in 1969 called Brandenburg versus Ohio, which involved Klansmen. And the Klansmen like to have rallies and burn crosses and put on the sheets. And they kind of learned the lessons of the civil rights movement. You call the TV stations and have them come out and film you. So TV crew comes out and films them, and Mr. Brandenburg, who's the leader of the local Klan group, says, you know what? We're sick and tired as a white Christian nation of us white Christians getting kicked around. And the president and the Supreme Court and the Congress are doing the bidding of the blacks. And I want to tell you, we're sick of it. And we are not a revengeant organization, exact words, but unless they start paying attention to what we think, we might well become a revengeant organization. And so that was suggesting violence. And for that, Mr. Brandenburg was arrested under an Ohio law that basically forbade the teaching of the overthrow of government, which was interpreted by the Ohio officials as overthrowing government. And the Supreme Court threw it out and said, look, it did not get to the point where it was the incitement to imminent lawless action with the likelihood that said action would result. At the time of the granting of the permit, there was no evidence that imminent lawless action would take place. And again, the point is here, you say, well, there might be imminent lawless action, but that's not enough. You have to show that there is going to be imminent lawless action. If Antifa called up the city and said, you know what, you let them speak, we're going to come in and we're going to fight these people, and there's going to be blood on the streets, and the Nazis say, well, we're going to defend ourselves, that's a different matter. But that did not happen. That did not happen. The violence that took place, I don't want to say it was spontaneous, but it was not indicated that it would necessarily happen. Again, our court system will bend over backwards for the speaker. As my argument is, as it should. It will bend over backwards for the Westboro Baptist Church, which we despise its message, but I think we should. It will bend over backwards to protect anarchists and communists and fascists, as I argue that it should. If there's going to be violence, there will be violence. And surely the law is clear that when the violence happens, you regulate on the basis of the violence, on the basis of the action, not of the speech. Yes?
Yeah. I wanted to say, I think of myself as updated with the news and different organizations. So Antifa, I never heard of them before. Maybe some people did, but I have. Okay, so what seems to me is going on, there's some moral equivalence to justify what's going on here, throw Antifa into the mix. And there is a group called Antifa, I'm not denying there isn't. But the way that, I'm not saying you're doing that, but the way the media or the whole establishment made it seem, it's like they're on equal footing, which is not the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree with you on that. I don't think that there's a moral equivalency between neo-Nazis and Antifa. Antifa has done things that it should not do, but it does not show up armed to the teeth. It does not predict a race war and the end of civilization. Its position is that we will go and we will challenge fascists everywhere. And that we will shout at them and we will argue with them, but if they're going to attack, we're going to attack back. We are not going to be pansies here. Part of the issue on Charlottesville was the response by the president and others that there were bad actors on each side. And you know what? You can find photos of Antifa people hitting Nazis with sticks, or the guy with the spray can, right, using it as a flamethrower. But in each case, those were defensive actions. And to my knowledge, not a single person of Antifa had a firearm. I could be wrong, but I have not seen that. So anyway, okay. Now, to be clear, yes?
I don't know where to start. But so the city of Charlottesville granted multiple permits from multiple divisive clubs to assemble at the same time. That's moronic.
The city would have the authority to say, you know what, we're full up on parades day. Come back tomorrow. We'll give you a parade permit for tomorrow. And they could do that. To the extent that they didn't, that's not a freedom of speech issue. That's just a poor management issue, right? Right. Okay. To be clear, no one ever has a First Amendment right to commit an act of violence, any act whatsoever. But the law of our First Amendment is full of people who argued successfully that the First Amendment was covered by what is called a symbolic act, such as burning a flag, burning a cross. In Des Moines, Iowa, in 1965, wearing a black armband in protest of the Vietnam War, which was deeply offensive to most people in Des Moines at that time, and in fact led several students to be suspended from school until such time as they agreed to come back to school without the armbands. The argument was, you're not saying anything, you're violating our dress code. You're acting. The Supreme Court disagreed, that their action really had as its core a political message. There is no political message at the core of violence, of rioting. All right? Okay. So, let's talk about universities. I used to run the lectures program at Simpson for many years, and we had, at the time, a fairly active college Republicans organization that they would come to me quite frequently and accuse the college and I guess me of only having liberal speakers. And I said, oops, there's my, yeah, no, that's fine. I know how to get rid of that. Hold on just a second. My tech people don't seem to know what is causing this. Let's see if I can get this back up. Anyway, okay, sorry about that. Back to the show. And I said, I'll tell you what. I will have any conservative speaker on campus who you want to come and, important point, who we can afford. And of course, they immediately wanted to have Ann Coulter. I said, that's fine. Let's have Ann Coulter. How much does she cost? $25,000. And I said, well, here's a problem. I only have a budget of $19,000 for the entire year. And I also said, you know, as conservative Republicans, you should understand that the college's bias is not a liberal bias, it's a balanced budget bias. Okay? And you should understand that, right? Well, what if we could get the money for this? I said, if you could kick in $25,000, and sure, of course, they could not do that, okay? So this has been an issue for quite some time, and it's come to a head recently at primarily large elite universities, many of which are associated with 1960s leftist radical causes, such as Berkeley, right? The home of the free speech movement. So all of a sudden, we're hearing that Berkeley doesn't allow free speech because they don't want any conservatives on campus. And I hear this a lot, right? I have a good friend who's quite conservative, who I golf with every year, and he tells me that I'm a propagandist. He means that in the best possible sense of the word, and that really we don't allow conservatives in. And I explained to him, and I said, you know, I just don't have the money to pay for these names, okay? So anyway, Berkeley was selected mainly because it's a high-profile university in a major population center that gets a lot of national media attention and can help generate lots of outrage. So, is it the fact that Berkeley is silencing conservatives? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So, how many of you have heard of Milo Yiannopoulos? Okay, have you seen Milo Yiannopoulos speak? No, but he was on Bill Maher a few months ago. He's a Breitbart agitator, provocateur. He was scheduled by a conservative student group at Berkeley to speak, and in fact, he did speak. He's Jewish and gay and an immigrant and, right, but he's, I don't think he's a U.S. citizen. I actually think he's a British citizen. He has a British accent at least, okay? So with all the controversy, he actually scheduled a free speech week that was supposed to be this week at Berkeley. And all the top-line conservatives were going to come. Ann Coulter, Steve Bannon, okay, etc. And for a number of reasons, but mostly related to money, one by one, they all dropped out. People were willing to come to Berkeley and speak, but they wanted to get paid. And it wasn't clear that they were going to get paid. So they weren't going to speak. And I got no problem with that, right? I say I love teaching, but if my college isn't going to pay me, I'm not going to do it. Which is, by the way, how much are you paying me for? No. No, she's not paying me tonight. I'm doing this because I love her. So, okay. So, anyway, Milo Yiannopoulos then has a press conference to announce that he's canceling Free Speech Week because the University of California made it impossible for him to have Free Speech Week. Which is really interesting because, in fact, the University of California did nothing to get in his way. I will tell you that about 6 or 7 years ago, I had a Milo Yiannopoulos moment at my college when I was the lectures director. We had a conservative alumnus who said that if we really believed in free exchange of ideas, we would have a woman named Pam Geller speak. Does anyone know who Pamela Geller? She's very anti-Muslim. She has a blog. She's appeared on Fox News and Breitbart, etc. And I said, sure. And so he gave me her contact information, and I wrote her an email, and I said, you've been suggested as a speaker. Would you like to come? And she said, sure. And I said, how much do you want? And she said, $7,000. And I said, would you take $500? Because that's what I have. And she said, yes. I said, great. We'll book your plane fare. We'll book a hotel for you. We'll have $500 when you show up. I knew that I was going to catch a lot of hell on campus, and I did about this, because by this point she was really starting to come into her own as a real provocateur. In fact, so much of a provocateur that a Muslim imam put out a fatwa on her before she came to Simpson. And then my academic dean is getting a little nervous. And I said, look, I think if we're going to stand for anything, we're going to stand for having her on campus. And he said, well, what if somebody shows up and kills her on campus? I said, well, I think that's a legitimate concern. But fear of violence in and of itself should not be the determining factor. Now, interestingly enough, Ms. Geller contacted me about 2 weeks before her visit and said because she was really nervous about her safety, she wanted us to pay about $10,000 in security costs for her. I said, I'm sorry, I don't have $10,000. I mean, if anyone has $10,000, please let me, but we don't have it. You are welcome to bring any security you want, and we will allow them to liaise with our security, but we're not going to provide any additional security. And then she said, okay, she would bring her own security, but they were going to bring guns and body armor. And we have a firm policy against firearms on our campus. And at that point, we were no longer talking about free speech, we were talking about actions, right? And Ms. Geller, in the end, decided not to come. We didn't tell her she could not come. In fact, at our last communication, I said, I hope that whenever your fatwa is lifted, that's a really weird thing to write in an email, I would love to explore bringing you back to campus in a future time. Never heard from her again, okay? But again, a lot of times when these things happen, it's the university that's blamed for it, right? Because the university won't do this. Now, do speakers have a right to speak at a public university? No. They don't. University is there for education. You can speak. Once invited, the university, a public university, has a duty to ensure your ability to speak, but they have no duty to invite you in the first place. My wife over here came with me tonight. She'll remember back in the day when we went to Iowa State, every springtime, we would have a preacher, an itinerant preacher on campus. His name was Jed. And Jed would set up on Central Campus. Is Jed still around? Oh my goodness. Okay. Jed was older than me. And he would be quite inflammatory. And he was sure that all of the, particularly the young co-eds at Iowa State in the kind of around 1980 period, were going to burn in hell because of their smoking, their drinking, their sex, etc., 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 etc. And a lot of people complained, said the university needs to remove him from campus. The university said, we will not. He's on our campus. We can't remove him unless there's violence. There's been no evidence of violence, although eventually somebody did go up and throw a pie in his face. You know, it's a real interesting situation, right? That now, once invited, you can't throw him off because you don't like what he's saying. Can you disinvite a speaker? Like, we didn't know how controversial this person was, so you're disinvited. We remove the invitation. No, you really can't. You really can't. Richard Spencer. Does that name ring a bell to anyone? He's a white nationalist. He is of the ilk of saying America is a white Christian nation and only white Christians have a right to actually be in this country. And what he does is he actually rents space on campus and invites himself. And universities decline to rent the space to him. Nobody from the university invited him. He's just saying, I want to rent a room on your campus so I can speak. And a university's got a right to say, no, we're not going to do business with you. So, okay, so, yeah. Why not do business with you? Because the university is acting as a business agent there and has, right. Right, right. And the university deems that Richard Spencer does not have anything of value to say. Well, I could add, by the way, if Simpson had not hired me, now I'm going to remove that. If Iowa State had not hired me, Simpson can do it at once. It's a private school. If it was Simpson State College and it did not hire me, and I said, I want to come in and rent your space to speak on whatever, they would not have any obligation to do business with me because they get to pick and choose who they do business with. If you want to go rent a room at the Memorial Union at Iowa State or the IMU at Iowa, you're subject to the same kind of time, place, and manner restrictions as anyone else. So it's clear that universities can decline that. You know, what's a little more in between is, what if the university doesn't invite a speaker, but a student group, like the college Republicans, or a fraternity, or somebody else? And that's a much more sticky issue. What if the college Republicans invited Richard Spencer, but the university said, no. You're not inviting him. Different states have different rules on this. And we really haven't had a clear interpretation of that yet. Okay? One thing I would tell you is I teach at a liberal arts college where most of the faculty are in fact liberal, but quite a few of them are quite conservative. And I would argue that they are just as welcome on our campus as anyone else. We have had conservative speakers on our campus, if they are within our budget. We have had conservative speakers that conservative faculty have asked to come as a favor that we didn't pay anything to. Generally, this is an issue that is, I think, blown a lot out of proportion. Okay? Any other questions about that? The whole basketball team? Oh, the Golden State Warriors. Right. Well, do you have a First Amendment right to visit with the president in the White House? No. Right. And I mean, I think you're going to get to a point now where just no team is going to go to the White House, right? Which is, I mean, in a certain way sad. I see someone with a Packers tie here. That's Packers jersey. If the Packers win the Super Bowl, my assumption is they won't be going to the White House, which, of course, is sad for a Packers fan, but, in the scheme of North Korea and Obamacare and everything, probably not terribly. Okay. So this is really interesting, though, and this is where I get a little alarmed, okay? This is some recent polling done by the Brookings Institute, which the Washington Post published actually last week. Most Americans, I'm sorry, not most, but a plurality of Americans believe that the First Amendment does not protect hate speech, which is factually wrong. Now, as a normative question, should it protect hate speech, that's a different matter entirely. But I can tell you, given our legal system, that's not going to happen anytime soon. It also pointed out that women are most likely, much more likely than men, to believe that hate speech is not protected speech. Democrats are more likely to agree that it's okay to shout over a speaker, to silence them. And I find that, as somebody who generally supports Democrats and liberals, I find that really upsetting. Okay? And we also find using violence to disrupt a speaker is acceptable. 1 in 5 people believe that. That's creepy. Okay? The good news is, right, it's still a minority. But that it's even 1 out of, I would think, okay, 1 out of 20 maybe, but 1 out of 5. And that number grows over time. So, in fact, I think the sense that people don't want to support that is problematic for democracy as a whole. Okay, so let's talk about taking a knee. This is our last one. Right, this started last season. We know this story. Colin Kaepernick started taking a knee. Originally, he sat down during the National Anthem. I believe he did it in 2 or 3 games before anyone even noticed he was doing it. And then it became a bit of a story. And then, as I recall, the 49ers had a game in Seattle, and a local veteran contacted the team and asked to talk to Kaepernick. And Kaepernick, on the Saturday before the game, met with this veteran at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle somewhere. And the veteran said, a lot of veterans find that really offensive. And they had a long conversation, and the veteran said, you know what, I think one thing that you could do is, instead of sitting down, take a knee. We take a knee in the military. Football players frequently take a knee. And I think that you would find that would be less insulting of veterans. And Kaepernick said, I can see what you mean. I hadn't thought about that. I don't have a military background. I'm not from a military family. I didn't know that. I don't want to insult anyone who wears a uniform. So that's when he started taking a knee. Okay. So then, he kept taking a knee. He didn't play much anymore. He eventually was dropped by the 49ers and is, depending on your point of view, either blackballed or at least no team has found that his services are worth contracting for. Of course, this all blew up last weekend when the president made a comment at a rally that, using some language that at least I'd never heard a president of the United States use publicly before, suggested that people shouldn't have the right to do that. And in fact, a lot of people interpret taking a knee as an attack, as an insult on troops, police, and the flag. And Kaepernick and others have been very clear. We do not mean to insult anyone. This is why we are doing it. We are doing it to protest police violence. And still, opponents, we don't want to hear it. Okay? All right. So, it's offensive to my values. I heard this comment on CNN. This isn't the place or time for this. But I always like to hear, when this isn't the place or time, well, what is the place or time? I a lot of times hear, now's not the time to talk about gun violence because there's just been a mass shooting. Let's not talk about that now. People are too emotional. Right. We don't want to talk about global warming when there's 3 successive hurricanes that cause, record-breaking damage. Well, okay. When do we talk about it? And the answer typically is when I'm not listening. You can say whatever you want, but I don't want to hear it and I don't want to see it. Which to me is problematic in a democracy. I think taking a knee is a long way from Charlottesville. Now, the argument is made the NFL is a private business, so it can do whatever it wants, right? And it can. But the NFL has decided not to sanction people for it. You could say that they're afraid. You could say that they're being supportive of free speech values. I think you're probably more closer to the truth. Okay, can't the league just tell players don't do this? Yeah, they can, but they've chosen not to. The NBA has chosen not to. Major League Soccer has chosen not to. Just like your employer could tell you, don't take a knee, other employers can say, we're not going to tell them not to take a knee.
Yeah, there's a Louisiana high school that just sent out a memo announcing that students who take a knee will be excused from the rest of their football games.
Even if a public school, a school district could do that because you're on the football team not for expressive activity but to play football. The NFL isn't covered by that at all. The NFL has just decided, and indeed a lot of the owners were taking knees. Now, is everybody now protesting police violence? No. They're protesting the President of the United States, which last I checked was kind of like a core First Amendment issue. It get really interesting, by the way. A lot of these games are played in publicly financed stadiums. So there actually isn't just, it's a private business. In fact, it's a private business that operates with the approval or the consent of the state. And some smart lawyer might go in and say, that $1 billion that the city of Atlanta put down on that new Mercedes-Benz stadium, that makes this a little more complicated. Maybe they do have First Amendment rights. But we're not going to get there yet, okay? So what should the fans do? Should they boycott? Should they boycott? The president suggested last week that he would lead a boycott. Then he backed off and said he wouldn't lead a boycott. There was a lot of booing, which, by the way, is protected speech. You can boo. Nobody's telling people not to boo. You could choose to not go to the game. You could choose to You could choose to not watch the game. Myself, I think there's one really, really good reason not to go to or watch NFL games that nobody seems to be too, well, yeah, that's one reason, right? It just costs too much. But I think the more important reason is because there's a lot of evidence that playing football actually does turn your brains to scrambled eggs. But I don't see anyone being willing to boycott football over that, okay? So anyway, okay. So here's my argument. And you may not agree with it, and that's fine. That's the First Amendment, right? I make an argument, I've made an argument consistently for years, that as a democratic culture, as opposed to a democratic state, we should observe what I call a cultural First Amendment. Because the First Amendment right, read strictly legally, says the government won't punish you, right? But my argument is that if somebody were to organize a boycott of the NFL over take a knee, that would in fact be an anti-democratic action. Certainly within people's rights, they can do it if they want. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be able to do it. I'm suggesting that it's anti-democratic and small d democratic, not Democratic Party, democracy, anti-democracy. Okay? Why would I say that? I would say that if you ever targeted a person for punishment on the basis of what they say, by boycotting, by firing, by whatever the case may be, it's really illegitimate to do so on the basis of what they say. If you want to punish someone on the basis of what they do, that's a different matter entirely. Okay? Now, why would I say that? People should have the right to do what they want to do, right? But here's my point, is democracy really to work is a way of life. It's not just a formal relationship between you and a government where you get to vote every year, 2 years, 4 years, whatever the case, and then you kind of just tune it out after a while because it gets ugly and nasty. It's not just a formal legal right. I think it is a cultural expectation that we should teach our children to respect, and that we frankly don't do a very good job of as a culture. Our view is, you have a right to say whatever you want as long as you don't offend me. And then I'm going to make life hell for you. I'm not going to go to your game. I'm going to try to get you fired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's really illegitimate in a democracy. You know what? Detest what people have to say as much as you want, but defend their right to say it. I detest neo-Nazis, but they should be able to speak. They should be able to march. I really do. I am a firm believer in the right of women to choose what to do with their own bodies. But I would never dream for a second to punish anyone for disagreeing with me significantly. Even saying, you know what, I think we should throw women in jail if they exercise that. I might find it offensive. I might find it wrong. But I'm going to engage them in an argument. I'm not going to shut them up. I'm not going to try to put the pressure on them to shut up. I'm not, if I was, you know, a 100% police supporter, I would not for a second suggest that these people shouldn't take a knee. That's what the police are here for, right? Is to protect order. And in fact, and this is the real interesting thing, okay, and I'm almost done, by the way. What you think is wrong today, a lot of times we find out was actually right, okay? A lot of people say, and I haven't seen any polling on it yet, but I would imagine a clear majority of Americans do not believe that players should take a knee, that it's disrespectful or whatever, right? So, but let me show you some research that I just came across actually yesterday. In May 1961, the Freedom Riders sought to integrate busing in the South. Today, we read about that and we say, those kids were heroes. They were the first wave of the civil rights movement in a lot of ways. In 1961, 61% of Americans thought they were wrong. Sit-ins, 57% thought they were counterproductive. Now we watch documentaries about them and we say, I wish I had the guts that those people had. Okay? You've heard of the March on Washington. You've heard the I Have a Dream speech. In August 1963, 60% of Americans had an unfavorable view of the March on Washington. Think about that for a second. Why? They shouldn't be getting up in people's face like that. And, there might be violence. And in fact, in the whole March on Washington, 250,000 people on the mall in Washington, D.C., there was one arrest. And that arrest was of a Klansman who was drunk and shouting racist epithets at the marchers. And he was arrested not for what he said. He was arrested for being publicly drunk. That was the only arrest. There was no violence at all. John Kennedy begged them not to march. And when it came off well, John Kennedy called and said, "Come on over to the Oval Office. I want to get my picture taken with you." Okay? Okay. In October 1966, do demonstrations by Negroes help or hurt their cause? 85% thought it hurt because white people don't want to be constantly told that they're wrong. There are better ways. There are more productive ways. And if you want something to read some night, you can read it online. It's free. It's Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail as he's sitting in jail after a demonstration. King answered the question, "Why do you do this?" When clearly all you're doing is getting yourself arrested, you're antagonizing people who might support you, and he said, "Because I can't not do it." My people have been told for decades and for centuries, just be patient. I can't sit by and be patient anymore. So, does this mean that someday we're going to be reading about take a knee? No, it's a long way away from knowing that. But I wouldn't be shocked if someday in 30 or 40 years, your kids or your grandkids aren't learning about how football players took a stand on an issue and helped affect the conversation, and that most people were really annoyed by it at the time. So I like to close with this, okay? Which is, remember Mill? Kate, do you remember Mill from London? Okay, John Stuart Mill, really thick, dense philosophy writer, but he's the 19th century's best thinker on freedom of speech. Why do we have freedom of speech? And he says we had it for 4 reasons. And I want you to take these with you, okay? The 4 reasons that we protect freedom of expression are, first of all, it helps us sort the true from the false. If you just say something is false and I don't want to hear it, you're basically saying, I can't be wrong. My view is the right view, and I don't want to hear anything else. So Mill said that's what we need to do. He also said that sometimes a false statement contains a grain of truth. It might be 90% wrong, but there might be a little nugget in there for us to think about. Okay? You might not like that football players were taking a knee, but if it gets you to think about police violence, well, maybe it wasn't all that bad. Okay? Sometimes ideas that are true today are shown to be false tomorrow. Vice versa. I always tell my students, take yourself back 100 years at our college, and how many of you women do you think are in this room? And of course, the answer is most of them aren't, because a higher education was not really seen at that time as something that a woman needed. In fact, it was offensive to a lot of people that women would do that. All right? But clearly we think differently now, right? And then finally, if we really believe something is true, absolutely true, and therefore it's off the table and we don't want to defend it anymore, then Mill says it loses its character. I use the example of saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Growing up as a kid in Iowa, we would get up every day, put our hand over our heart, I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and you'd start looking, right? Because it didn't mean anything to you. You were told that you had to do it, you were told you had to accept it as true, and you mouthed it, and then you got onto your math work. Right. Right, well, it is in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of times people just kind of mouth prayers at church or wherever, right? They're not really even thinking about them. But you know what? The one thing about 9/11 that I found really interesting, there was a lot of schools who said, okay, today we're going to spend the whole day thinking about what that pledge says because we got attacked yesterday. Now, that was great. We're actually trying to figure out what the truth is about that. Of course, you know, that lasted for about a week, and then we were back to mouthing things again, right? So, anyway, here's what I would tell you. Last thing, then I'll let you go. Mill's perhaps most famous quote, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion, if there was only one person who had one view and the billions of people on the planet thought the opposite, those billions would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. And so with that, I thank you. I appreciate it. Maybe I went on a bit long. I don't know. But thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
You know, on the issue of kneeling by football players, I'm fully in support of their rights to express their desire that people be more aware of their cause, shall we call it. One thing that offends me about it is that they choose to do it during the Pledge of Allegiance as opposed to maybe right afterwards or in some other time. But
that's a common thing, right? Why are you doing it now? And the reason they're doing it now is because you're watching now. If they do it afterwards, you won't be watching, and no one will pay attention. Which, again, is what some people, well, you're free to do it, I just don't want to watch it. But of course, if everybody got up to speak and nobody was obliged to listen, we'd never really learn anything. And yeah, let's be clear. Players and speakers generally don't speak with the thinking that their speech is just going to vanish into the ether and not be seen or heard. The First Amendment not only guarantees the right to speak, but it also guarantees a right to speak effectively. Right. By the way, as you know, some teams have chosen just not to come out at all. And some fans are upset about it, but the teams say, look, we just don't want to get involved in it, so we're staying in. And in fact, has anyone ever been to a sporting event in another country? English Premier League or La Liga or anything like that? No other country performs its national anthem at the beginning of a game. In fact, when we host international students, and we will take a group to the Iowa State game in about a month, one of the first things they notice is, why do you do this? And I say, well, because Americans are very proud of their nation and of their patriotism. And I said, well, yeah, we're proud of our nation, our patriotism, but we don't feel the need to play the national anthem of France or Argentina or whatever the case is. We just know it's there. And of course, the NFL, about 11 years ago in the post 9/11 age, started to turn the national anthem into a real production. And so that was clearly done to increase the ties between the military and the league, which has a certain value to it, to the league and to the military. And then to say, well, you shouldn't kneel during it is saying, I don't want to hear that message. So, yeah, thanks for being patient.
No, I was just going to follow up with the national anthem. We've got some friends who run video for the Vikings, and he said up until last year, they never filmed the national anthem. It was never shown, but now because there's a story there, it's the money shot, and everyone tunes in to see what's going on. And as well, it wasn't up until like 2008, the team wasn't even on the field for the national anthem. So they were all sitting at that time.
And that's part of that whole, turning the national anthem into a bit of a production number. I was in an argument on Facebook yesterday or a day before with somebody about, I don't see why the players need to turn this into a spectacle. And I said, spectacle? This is a spectacle. And I posted a video of the 120-yard flag. Where do you even get those? Really? I mean, that's a spectacle to me. Now, by the way, if the team wants to do that, I got no problem with it. I got no problem with it. That's fine. At the same time, I will be there. I'll stand. We had somebody on Facebook who said the other day, I will stand, I will always stand. And I wrote, and I support your right to do that. So, yes.
Okay. Schools are governments, and hate speech is protected, so you can burn a cross. So, but the football team, the 5 kids who burned the cross in Iowa, they were suspended from the football team. Okay. So why can a school take that kind of action? That's my first question.
Okay. You want to answer second? Go ahead and answer second.
Looking into the future, social media is going to open up a whole new world. What do you think is coming with First Amendment and social media?
First question, how can the school get off telling kids to not engage in hate speech if hate speech is covered by the First Amendment? And to be clear, the school didn't kick the kids out of school. They kicked them off the football team. You don't have a right to be on the football team. When you join the football team, you agree to a code of conduct just as surely as if you agree to a code of conduct if you are a public employee, if you agree to a code of conduct when you're a member of the military. So that's the reason. And to go a little bit deeper, our court system has never said that people in the public schools, students in the public schools, have the identical First Amendment rights as adults. Said that they have a lot of First Amendment rights, but schools do have the right to maintain a proper educational environment. And so if you said, therefore, the school suspends a kid who is wearing a swastika t-shirt, okay? And that kid could easily walk down the street wearing the swastika t-shirt, could go to the public park with the swastika t-shirt, could go to a city council meeting wearing a swastika t-shirt. But once they come into the school and the other kids are paying more attention to the swastika t-shirt than they are to their biology lesson, then the school, I think rightly, can move in. Not to punish the speech, because the kid can still do it outside of school. It's to enforce a certain environment. Your second question is about social media. Social media is in a lot of ways the First Amendment freak, of which I consider myself one, nirvana. Everyone now has a microphone, right? And here's the deal, right? We should support that. Now, you know what? In the end, I get in a lot of arguments with friends who have completely different views of mine, but I never think or suggest for a second that they shouldn't have the platform. Now we might say it's turned us into a more coarse culture, a more divided culture, and maybe that's the case. My argument would be that our apparent unanimity was actually a false unanimity that was based on us not having the ability to speak, because we didn't have the platform for it. And I think in a lot of ways, James Madison, who wrote the First Amendment, would be on Twitter today, absolutely, right? He might not be writing what Trump does, but he'd be on Twitter. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I hate this, it's more of a question than a statement, but to answer where those giant flags came from on the fields, I had to do that once when I was in the Marine Corps. They had us stand out for there, and my parents thought they were going to get it recorded when it was going on TV. It was not. It was in 2012, before any of this was happening. Sure. But the teams have those flags, and they're actually kind of not kept in where they're supposed to be per like American flag rules, and technically after they fall on the ground, they're put on the ground afterward, which is frankly technically disrespectful. Right. Not frankly, it's technically disrespectful. With a 360-foot long flag, it's probably really impractical. Well, you could have us all then refold it, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that's where those flags. The teams have those flags, and they usually then ball them up on the field afterward.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
I'll bet you I have a different perspective here than most anyone, because Hell, I voted for George Wallace in 1968. And my opinion has changed in those 40 frickin' years that it's been. But I lived through the race riots of the 60s. And I saw the flag burning and the draft card burning when I was in ROTC at the University of South Dakota, the Harvard of the Midwest. And things change. And I've been a registered Republican since 1968 up until about 6 weeks ago, which I'm no longer a registered Republican. But the thing is I refuse to be offended. I can't remember who said it, but I'm plagiarizing here. The surest badge of victimhood is to be offended. You can get mad, you can get angry, and you can take action, but Jesus, being offended because a football player takes a knee, that doesn't change my opinion one iota. Kate has done something here. She's organized discussion groups, think tanks, whatever it may be, to bring discussion to topics that may at some point actually devise a plan of action. Once that plan of action is decided upon, then someone's got to fund it. And then you've got to go, and then you have to be an activist. That's what makes a difference. Now, if these guys want to take a knee and disrespect the flag and stuff like that, I could give a shit. But if they want to do what Kate's done and say, hey, we need to discuss this. We need to get to the core issues. Nobody knows what the core issues are anymore. That's lost. And it's lost because we got a moron as a president who, just don't get me started on that, and I'm a Republican, or was a Republican, but there's no solution being offered. And these kind of things on a small basis, town square basis, can't do anything but help. And we, as a nation, I was born south of the Mason-Dixon line, and it angers me when they pull Robert E. Lee's statue down. But so what? I mean, a statue's a statue. It doesn't do anything to affect my core beliefs, and this is all window dressing.
A couple of thoughts. First of all, you have raised implicitly the question, why do we have the right to free expression? I mean, why do we have it? A lot of us think that we have it because I get a right to say what I want to say. And that is part of it. But my argument has always been that the reason why the First Amendment was created was to serve as a mechanism to help us talk without enforced silence so that we could do things like this, so that we could come together and decide and compromise, right? So when we talk about the football players, for example, this is how kind of the world of hypermedia has done it, right? The players take a knee because they say they want to start a conversation on police violence. The people who are offended say, I didn't hear any of that. I just hear offensiveness. And then they said, no, we want to talk about police violence. No, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about why you're offending me. Well, we really want to talk about police violence. And no, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about something else. And the fact is when you do things like this, and this is one of the reasons I think this is great, a community comes together and say, I think this, I think that, I think that. And we got to all look at across the table at each other and say, well, how do we solve this, right? But in a world of Fox News and CNN, we can just scream at each other and nobody listens, other than the people who already agree with us.
The idiocracy, this whole football thing is the 54th guy on that roster is not kneeling. It's only the studs who know that they're protected because they already got $25 million in the bank and the next team's going to pick them up. It's all show and no go.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Statement. The part about the no show, no go type thing, I agree. I agree people have a right for their opinions and they can voice that, but you need to be part of the solution and not just be the problem. And I'm not saying that everyone that took a knee is just out for publicity, but I feel some are. But if they're doing things outside of the arena of kneeling on TV, then I would like to think that the media would also share that. If they are doing things trying to be part of the solution, because that is their belief and it's not just for that publicity, then that needs to be told as well. But I don't know. Sometimes I think it's a lot for show, and they're not being part of the solution. Because you can't just do that and be done. If you're going to have an opinion, okay, then take it one step further and one step further.
No, I agree with you a lot. Although I would say, for Colin Kaepernick, there was no new contract. I mean, he's done. Now, whether or not, after a while, you can't not sign all, however many hundreds of football players. You're not going to have a league. And there is a bit of safety in numbers, right? You can't cut us all, right? So in that sense, that's there. You're right. One of the things that we do is we make bold statements. We're very good at talking. We're not very good at listening. And that's what we really need to do, right? I hear a lot of, we think that we should talk about police violence. No, we don't want to talk about police violence. That's fine. You're just a troublemaker. We've got to be able to protect ourselves, and I absolutely agree with that. Does that mean that every policy needs to be what it is? I don't know. But we never get to that discussion. So, pardon me?
But aren't we talking more about police violence now because of what's going on with these take a knee?
I don't know. I don't know if the take a knee has led to any real soul searching on this. I wish it would. And by the way, I have my views on police violence, but as I say that the day people start listening to me on those issues is the day we're all in big trouble. And so I'm really more interested that people have a chance to say and that other people have a chance to hear and that we find ways forward, and the culture is not very good at that. I think I'm going to give it back to Kate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. We got to let our Packers, Bears fans go because I know some of us have been itching a little bit. But thank you so much for coming here. I really appreciate it. I think we had a great discussion tonight. Couple reminders. I didn't bring this up at the start, but our October meeting, the last Thursday of the month at 6 p.m., we will have a panel discussion up here, which is the first time we've done that at Cedar Talks, and we will be talking about some of those actionable items. What can people do to create a productive conversation with people on the other side? We will have some local leaders. So far confirmed, we have Transcend North Iowa, a transgender rights group here. We also have the chair of the Floyd County Republicans who have agreed to come here. We will have more speakers coming. So please mark that in your calendar. I'm really excited about that event. Follow us on Cedar Talks Charles City Facebook group to be reminded to get to know your speakers ahead of time. And thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.